So good evening. My name is David Trickey. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm also co-director of the UK Trauma Council. Thank you so much for joining us in this webinar this evening. You're very, very welcome. We are going to be thinking about childhood trauma, war and conflict. And I'm really pleased to say we have some true experts sharing their knowledge and experience with us this evening so that we can think about what can be done to help to reduce the impact of war and conflict on children, young people and their families. I would just like to share a few slides, if I may, just to tell you a little bit about the UK Trauma Council. But before I do that, just a bit of housekeeping, really. So the way we're going to run this webinar is we'll keep people's videos and microphones turned off. If you have any technical questions, please use the Q&A and one of our amazing events team will be able to help you out. If it's helpful, you can have closed captions. We'll be operating Zoom. You just click on the button at the bottom of your screen and you should have closed captions, subtitles coming up. We're going to record the webinar presentations so that they're available after today, but we're not going to record the Q&A. We just wanted to make sure people feel that they don't feel that added pressure of having their questions or their answers being recorded. And just to say, we're going to be thinking about children and trauma, and it's right that we should be moved by thinking about such things. But if for whatever reason this evening your feelings are stronger than you're happy with, please do what you need to do to look after yourself. That might mean you need to step back for a bit and then come back and join us. It might mean that now isn't the right time to be thinking about this and you can watch the recording on another day. It might mean you need to reach out to friends or colleagues, or you can access other sources of support. One such source of support would be the Anna Freud Crisis Messenger. If you go to the Anna Freud website, you'll find that very easily. So let me tell you a little bit about the UK Trauma Council. It's a project where we try to help those around children and young people that have experienced traumatic events to try and reduce the impact. So we very much focus on the young people and the children, but we do that by helping those around them, such as social workers, foster carers, therapists, teachers. We also try and help policymakers to make sensible, evidence-based decisions, but mainly we are producing free and accessible resources and guidance. We don't just make these ideas up, we very much draw on the research evidence available. We work very closely with our intended audience. So if we're writing something for teachers, we'll work very closely with groups of teachers to try and make sure that what we're doing is useful. We have a group of child trauma experts from around the UK from different professional backgrounds. So we very much draw on their expertise. And we have a youth advisory board made up of young people with experience of trauma themselves. So that's how we go about doing what we do. We have various research and practice resources, including videos to explain some things to those of us working with children and young people. We also have regular research roundouts where we try to bring the research together that's been published to try and understand particular areas. One of them is on racism, mental health and trauma. That might be of interest to some of you. We also have a research roundup on developmental trauma disorder. What does the evidence actually tell us about this as a concept? And then we have various resources. One set of resources on childhood trauma, the brain and the social world, really helping people to understand what is the impact on children and young people's brains of traumatic experiences. How do their brains adapt to their experiences and what problems might that cause? But also really importantly, what can we do to try and reduce that impact? We have resources on traumatic bereavement aimed at both schools and also clinicians working in this area. We have some resources on childhood trauma and PTSD, some animations made with and for young people explaining what PTSD and what they might do about it and what therapy might be like. And we also have some training videos there for those people doing cognitive therapy for PTSD. We have a set of resources aimed very clearly at schools and communities and early years settings around critical incidents. What can they do to create the environment for recovery? And very recently, just a week or so ago, we released our resources on childhood trauma, war, migration, and asylum. And these resources consist of a couple of toolkits, one aimed very much at educational communities, just to help them think about how they can help young people who have been affected by war and conflict, migration. How can they recognize difficulties and how can they respond to trauma? And also resources aimed at community organisations, and they would include a plan for running a workshop with young people. So a lot of the organisations we partnered up with are brilliant at supporting young people, helping them to access education, to get housing, to get benefits, all those sorts of things, and to offer social support, really important. But when it comes to talking and thinking about their mental health, they just needed a bit more of a guide. So that's what can be found there. There's also a self-help guide for young people, which is available in several different languages, and an animation rather than aimed at those around the young people. The animation is very much aimed directly at young people themselves. So it's to help them to stop and think about how their experiences may have affected them and what might they be able to do about it. And one of my colleagues, I'm sure, will be putting the link for that animation into the Q&A, so you can follow that up later on if you want to. Okay. So that's just a very quick whistle-stop tour of the UK Trauma Council for you. So one slightly simplistic way of thinking about the impact that potentially traumatic events can have on people is to think about different trajectories or paths that children and young people might follow in terms of their distress and difficulties. Now, I'm not being specific here, thinking about post-traumatic stress disorder or depression. I'm just thinking about, very broadly speaking, generally distress and difficulties. Now, there'll be some young people that actually seem pretty unaffected by some events. Somehow, something has enabled them to get through things without having too many difficulties. There'll be some people that seem to do okay for a while, and then later on, further down the line, maybe months or even years later, they'll develop some difficulties. So they have a bit of a delayed response. There'll be some people, quite a lot of people, that initially are very distressed, have a high level of difficulties, but actually over time, they spontaneously recover. That level of distress and difficulties will decrease as the days, weeks, months, and years go by. And then there'll be some people that have enduring or lasting difficulties, and those would be the ones that we would hope we can link up with therapy. What I really want to think about is, how do we nudge people onto the blue line rather than the orange line? How do we help people to recover from their experiences? How do we basically put therapists like me out of a job by creating that environment where more people are more likely to recover? And the really good news is that the hard work has been done for us. So an author in the US, Stephen Hobfall, and about 19 other colleagues looked at the research evidence that was available and really worked hard to work out what needs to feed into that environment for recovery. What are the principles based on what we know about trauma, how it works, how it affects people, and what helps? What would be the principles from that evidence? And they came up with these 5 principles, and these are kind of universal. It's not just for the US audience. This is based on research from around the world. And what I love about this list is that it's evidence-based. It's not just made up and random. I love the fact that these are principles, not prescriptions. It doesn't say on day 7 do this, on day 9 do that. It says think about these broad areas. And I love the fact that they're all really sensible. There's nothing kind of surprising or really out there. These are all just really sensible things. And many people would be doing these anyway. But actually following traumatic events or potentially traumatic events, often those around the children, young people, are really worried their level of anxiety has raised, and they don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to make it worse. And they end up perhaps not being able to respond in the way they would have responded. Many people are really good at responding to stressful events, but when they think it's a trauma, they think, oh, I need to do something different. Well, actually, these are just very common sense principles. So I'm just going to go through these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is about a sense of safety. Now, one of the problems with potentially traumatic events is that they shatter a person's belief that the world is safe enough. And even if they are actually safe enough now, when the conflict has passed, or maybe they've moved to an area that is safe, they may not believe it. They may remain on that high level of alert, kind of worried about what's going to happen next. So we need to meet their basic needs first. And I love the way that Rachel did some of her work through giving people bread as well, so they're meeting their basic needs whilst also helping them with some other things as well. Establishing routines and familiarity. They may be new routines, but they can still become routines. That really helps children to feel safe and secure when things are predictable and they know what's coming next. maximizing consistency. So whether that's staff at school or in a placement or things in the classroom or timings, having things in a regular pattern can really help. Making sure that we are trustworthy and reliable. If we say we're going to be somewhere at 5 o'clock, let's be there at 5 o'clock. That's going to help people to start to regain their trust in the world as a safe place. And Shoshana's already talked a bit about this. Where are they getting information from? Can we work out what stories are they hearing? Because often news media and social media, they're not interested in creating that whole narrative with all the information. They want to pick on the most spectacular bits of a story, which might be the most frightening bits. A journalist once said to me, he said, David, you and I have basically got the same job, haven't we? I said, really? How do you work that out? He said, we both help families to tell their stories. And I said, yeah, that is true, but for opposite reasons. You want them to tell their story to make it as big and spectacular as possible. I want them to tell their story so that they can put it behind them. And what I really liked about what Shoshana said was this isn't about just kind of restricting their access to the internet and not letting them see certain things. That might be a part of it, but actually it's more about getting alongside them. Unless teenagers have changed since I was one, if you tell a teenager not to access a certain site, they're probably not going to do what we suggest. So can we get alongside them? Can we speak with them? Can we collaborate with them? Where are you getting the information? Let's think about that. Let's think about this together. And also, helping people to feel safe now is actually allowing them and enabling them to talk about their past and answering any questions they have. Because the more they can understand and process things that have happened in the past, the more they'll be able to see the world now is safe if it is now safe. And it's important that we remain calm and compassionate and curious. And again, Shoshana mentioned this, because if we just give immediate reassurance, or if we say, oh, don't be silly, of course you're safe now, well, that invalidates and it closes down the conversation. Instead, if we can be curious and go, oh, that's interesting, tell me more about that, and help them to find their own sense of safety rather than just thinking we can donate ours. A sense of calm, one of the difficulties, as we've just heard with traumatic events, is that it leaves people in this higher state of alert. Sometimes social support and connection is the thing that can help people to feel calmer. Sometimes explaining to them that, yeah, of course, you're having nightmares. That makes sense. So reassuring them that their reactions are normal. And working out with them what, who, and when helps them to calm down. So focusing on their body, noticing their arousal level and noticing what helps. Is it about naming their emotions and talking about them? Is it about doing some exercise or listening to music or playing music or reading or coloring or playing and working out what's going to really help people? Now, most parents, carers and teachers and other adults around the children, they do this all the time anyway. But following traumatic events, maybe they need to work a bit harder. Maybe they need to just pay a bit more attention to what's going on for the young person and just think a bit more about these things. The next one is this sense of connection. Generally, we're really social beings. Sometimes after traumatic events, either we isolate ourselves or other people withdraw just at the moment when we need them most, because research consistently supports the idea that social support and attachment is protective, or at least reduces the impact of trauma. So how can we enhance their opportunities for social support and connectedness? Can we keep an eye out for those children that are becoming more isolated and withdrawn? And work out, well, where do they get their social support from? Is it from their peers? Is it from the carers and parents who might need to step forwards a bit more? Is it from extended family members? Is it teachers, other school staff? Is it from sports coaches? Working out where can they get their connection from? And then how do we help them to regain a sense of control? Very often, traumatic events can shatter a person's assumption that they have at least some control of what's going on around them. How can we help them to repair this view that they do have some control over some things? So can we collaborate with them? Can we provide them with choices? Can we teach them emotion regulation to control what's going on inside their body, let alone what's going on outside their body? Can we draw attention to what they can do rather than just focus on what they can't do? And how do we help children and young people and families and classes and communities to do things for themselves rather than rush in and do it for them? And often following traumatic events, we want to try and fix it. We want to try and make things better. So we want to do stuff. And actually, maybe if we just take a breath, are there ways we can help them to do things for themselves rather than do it for them? And can we manage their expectations? Can we let people know what's coming up in the next days, weeks, and months? And can we be transparent about the things we don't have control over? Can we be really clear about, well, this is going to happen and this is why? And then the last of these principles is about a sense of hope. Now, we don't want to, often traumatic events will sort of take away a person's hope for their future. We don't want to dismiss their concerns or minimize them or just try and replace them with our own ideas. We want to be curious and listen to their stories, both about their past, but also about their future. And maybe we can start to draw attention to their skills and their strengths and any small steps that they've taken. And can we start to weave in some future positive thinking? So where do you see yourself in a year? What do you think you're going to do? What are the skills you have that are going to help you to get there? And if necessary, can we hold the hope for them? Can we, not in a way that diminishes their story and their thoughts, but can we hold on to some hope for them and with them? So these are these five principles. And if you want more information, you could either go to the original article by Stephen Hobford, but also in the UK Trauma Council resources on particularly the ones for critical incidents in schools. There's more description of what these principles might look like. That resource is aimed at schools, but I think there's things that all of us can take from there. And just finally, if you want more information, there's a booklet here for parents that was designed by the Greater Manchester Resilience Hub after the Manchester Arena bombing, and it's really good. It really helps people to understand what they can do to look after their children after trauma. And it's more generic, more general than just the arena bombing. So it will help, I think, people to think about that. And then there is a book that's also available. I wouldn't buy this book because I've just told you everything that's in it. So, but the Pennine, the Greater Manchester Resilience Hub leaflet is really good.